Faisal Saeed Al Mutar is an Iraqi-born satirist, speaker, and counter-extremism advocate based in New York City. He was admitted into the United States as a refugee in 2013 after working for multiple years in the field of human rights, and he founded Ideas Beyond Borders in 2017, which is a nonprofit organization which focuses on preventing extremism before it takes root. One of his main projects is the translation of books and articles promoting critical thinking, science, and philosophy into Arabic, because as the UN Development Report cites, there are more books translated to Spanish in 1 year than Arabic in 1,000 years. Recently, it translated books from Harvard professor Steven Pinker, British politician and activist Maajid Nawaz, to name a few, and many Wikipedia pages. In 2006, he received the Gold President's Volunteer Service Award from former President Barack Obama. Our second speaker is Zachary Wood, a recent graduate at Williams College, TED speaker, columnist, opinion editor at The Guardian. During his time at Williams College, he was president of a club called Uncomfortable Learning, which fostered learning through difficult and often controversial conversations. He got national attention for inviting speakers such as Charles Murray and John Derbyshire. And as a result, he testified before the Senate as a rising senior in a defense titled Free Speech 101, the assault on the First Amendment on college campuses. And he recently published his autobiography, Uncensored, My Life in Uncomfortable Conversations as an Intersection of Black and White America. And thank you to our sponsors, we were able to give 20 people that book. And lastly, our moderator, Alison Talker, and she is the co-founder and vice president of Colloquia. She's a senior at Columbia College studying political science and Russian language and culture. She is also the event director for Women in Law and Politics, as well as a board member for World Arrow Region Charity, Inc. And she'll be attending law school next year. So without further ado,
for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming. My first question is, how did you guys meet? Because I know you know each other from before.
So we met in April of this year. I spoke at 10, 2018, and Faisal was there, and we met after my talk, I believe at a reception. Was it?
There has to be alcohol included, so it must be one of these stuff, yeah.
And then later, this summer, midsummer, we ended up going out for drinks, and we were at this bar, and we started talking about foreign policy and interventionism, and where we agreed and where we disagreed, and it ended up being this several hours long conversation, and we thought it really modeled civil discourse in terms of how we articulated our differences of opinion.
Yeah, it's the longest date I've ever had in a while. Yeah, so I didn't know who Zach was when I was at TED, and I saw him on the stage, and I was really impressed by the fact that he was able to bring in the age of political polarization, bringing people who are polarizing is now, I would say, an act of courage, an act of resilience. And I was actually trying to recruit him to join my organization as a kind of like a campus coordinator or stuff, and then I realized that he graduated, so I was like, shit. Then through my managing director, Melissa, and so am I, we managed to constantly maintain the conversation with Zach, and then we've had the pleasure to meet there over bar. And when I realized, I've been talking about foreign policy for quite a while, and it's been an Islamic extremism, I say the link between foreign politics and extremism, and it's been one of the subjects that, for the lack of a better word, triggering. And how many times have been to conversations in which it just ends there? I mean, I consider myself woke. I have different views on different political parties, and the fact that we were able to maintain a civil conversation over, I mean, obviously alcohol helped, I think we're all there, but so thanks Heineken for sponsoring that event, but just the fact that we were able to maintain a civil dialogue over, I think, values that both of us hold strongly is I think very much needed in this day and age in which, as we have seen last week, there's so much with the Covenant and stuff, and you see how that's kind of a sign of how we're getting more polarized than getting united. And I think that conversation like this and really building new friendships is necessary for this world.
Great, thank you. So why don't you tell us a bit about how you've been shattering echo chambers in your own lives?
You want me to start first?
Yeah.
Because my story is more traumatic. Just kidding. No, just kidding. So, I mean, I would say that, I mean, the subject of political polarization and religious violence have been really one of the two main aspects of my life. I mean, I grew up in Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and then the Civil War happened. And the Civil War was really based on sectarian lines. It's, I mean, the echo chamber is kind of the end of the iceberg in terms of how it was formed. I mean, I grew up when the Iraq War happened in 2003. For those of you who probably remember when kind of Al-Qaeda started popping up strongly, and then as a result, the Mahdi army from the Shia crowd started popping up. And Baghdad was, where I'm from, was getting really separated over sectarian lines. I grew up in a Sunni neighborhood, and as a result, pretty much most of West Baghdad, at least where I come from, became an echo chamber for Sunni militants. Al-Qaeda took over my neighborhood for months, and then also because of also my location, it was a central place in West Baghdad in which many of the Shia militias were coming in, to the way my area became a battlefield of two people who grew in echo chambers to the maximum. I mean, obviously, that's an extreme place, which is the Middle East, but so I would say that the fact and seeing that, I mean, growing up, and I left Iraq at the end of 2009. I moved to Lebanon, Malaysia, and here in the United States, and I'm seeing kind of similar trends are happening all over the world. Syria being an example is a country destroyed in front of our eyes in less than 5 years now. We're seeing the refugee crisis in Europe, in which many, well, not necessarily the refugee crisis, but also the many of the Muslim migrants who are living in Europe, living in more of ghettoized places, in Belgium, in France, and elsewhere, in which many of the people talk to people who look like them and speak the same language and share the same culture. And as a result, extremism start popping up out of these places. I mean, there are some reports, some verified, some unverified, in which there are more ISIS members from Moroccans who live in Belgium than ISIS members of Moroccans live in Morocco. And that to me is not a sign of, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's coming from people constantly listening. I mean, I think our brains are not in any way a neuroscientist, but I respect those who are. And they always tell us that when people, I mean, brain has a failure confirmation bias. And when you're living in neighborhoods, we're always listening to people who agree with you, and your ideas and your beliefs, cultural or religious, are not challenged. Then I can definitely see that as resulting in, number one, political polarization, and then vis-a-vis resulting to extremism and vis-a-vis resulting to terrorism. So the reason why, I mean, I made that the mission of my life to, as Serena mentioned, the mission of my organization, prevent extremism before it takes root. And I think that destroying echo chambers is really dealing with extremism before it takes root. And I hope that we can do this together with Zach and many people like you here.
Great, Zach.
So
Thank you.
I was raised and grew up in DC and Detroit, and my parents got divorced when I was 3, and so I lived with my mom as a single mother till about the age of 14, and my mother had a mental illness. She had schizophrenia, and so that was the first significant aspect of my life that required me to be more compassionate, to be more empathetic, to try to kind of step outside of myself and understand what someone else was dealing with. And naturally, as a child, you want to have a positive, healthy relationship with your mom. But my relationship with my mom was very challenging and very complicated. And despite many of the difficulties, she did a lot of good for me. And one thing that she valued deeply was my education and the value of learning and the value of knowledge, and specifically the value of considering and listening to things that were less familiar, things that were challenging. And so that's something that she raised me to see the value in. And when I was in 4th grade, she felt that the public school that I was going to in Detroit, it was not the kind of education that I should be receiving. In that environment, asking questions was discouraged. Good students were the ones who were obedient, who did their work, who listened, did things in a timely manner. And my mom said, you know what, you're reading all of these books, you love learning, you should be encouraged to ask questions, encouraged to step outside of your comfort zone. And so she enrolled me in a private school in a suburb right outside of Detroit. And ever since then, I have had access to a wonderful education and to a number of educational opportunities that I otherwise would not have had access to. And so when I arrived at Williams College in 2014, I was eager to engage with the world of ideas. I wanted specifically to tackle ideas that I found disagreeable, to engage with issues that I didn't know as much about, and to talk to my peers and professors and outside speakers whom I knew I disagreed with. And so that led me to a group that had existed on campus for about a year called Uncomfortable Learning. And when I got there, Uncomfortable Learning was lesser known on campus. The mission, the ethos of the club was to invite speakers with views that would spark difficult conversations around pressing issues of our time. So everything from climate change to issues of race and class and gender, and I gravitated toward it. For one, I'd always been interested in political, social, and economic issues. Two, it was this opportunity for me to have these kinds of difficult, uncomfortable, and challenging conversations. And what I found when I did this was that the echo chamber was real. That at Williams College, a small school in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, geographically isolated, it is very difficult for students who hold conservative views or libertarian views or views that are just not mainstream and of the left to feel comfortable saying what they think, whether it's in class, whether it's in a dorm, or whether it's in a dining hall. And so in inviting these speakers to campus, the tide of resistance was incredibly intense. And I had to think about what was the best way to make this something that could be productive and edifying for the student body and for the campus at large. That required a number of individual interactions and conversations in which I tried to frame things very carefully, in which I would say to people, listen, I understand that this is going to be difficult. It's difficult for me, it's not easy for me, but this is why I think it's worth it. This is why I think we're stronger and not weaker because of it. And I gained a lot from those conversations. Ultimately, I was not able to change the campus culture more broadly in the ways that I'd hoped, but I was given a sense of hope from some of those individual interactions, because even when I didn't modify my own beliefs necessarily, or the person I was talking to didn't modify their position, we were able to walk away with a better understanding of each other. And so in doing this work with Uncomfortable Learning, it has not only affirmed my belief in the value of discomfort in an educational sense, but it's also affirmed my conviction that it's really important to try to listen to those you disagree with and to make the effort to step outside of your comfort zone and have conversations that you know will be challenging.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question. Uncomfortable Learning invited Charles Murray. I wanted to know what was the reason behind that, and what was the reaction like on campus?
So the reasoning behind inviting Charles Murray was that he wrote a book in 1994, co-authored with Richard Hirsi, called The Bell Curve. And in the book, he suggests some things that lead to very controversial and problematic conclusions about the relationship between race and intelligence. He also wrote a book called Coming Apart, in which some of that is tied to social policy, public policy. And I thought that with the rise of Donald Trump at that time, with where our country was in terms of political polarization, that he would be a very important speaker to hear from, in terms of how he would challenge the student body, in terms of the ideas that he had, and in his ability to articulate and defend his position. And so that was the reasoning behind inviting him. When I made the invitation, within minutes of announcing it on Facebook, I was getting text messages, I was getting emails, I was getting calls, one or two from blocked numbers, and people just were not having it. Many students who were opposed to it saw Williams, and I understood this, as their home, as a community that they belonged to. And because they belonged to that community, they did not want to have a speaker there whom they felt personally denigrated them in some way. And so it was very difficult. Some students said that they were going to protest. Some students said that they were going to lock arms and make sure that he was not able to enter the auditorium. And I was positively, I was surprised when the event actually turned out pretty well relative to other uncomfortable learning events. There was a turnout of about 160 people, students and faculty. Murray made his argument. He was challenged. Students raised objections. They made incisive comments. They asked him tough questions. He had to backpedal sometimes, clarify and ramify his answers. And so it ended up, for me, really being this kind of idyllic, kind of intellectual conversation around a very difficult topic.
Great, thank you. Faisal, what do you think students can learn from conversations such as Zach had with Charles Murray or other student groups have had with contentious speakers?
Well, I mean, I think is that people come to university to learn and to study, and I mean, the professors and kind of, I mean, most universities have their own agenda, they have their education system to the way that, generally speaking, that, I mean, I speak at universities all the time, and they're, I would say on the subject of Islam, Islamic extremism, etc., they are really informed, either really badly or very little. And that is pretty much most of the, I would say, like, I mean, many go to grad school or some go to PhD, but many people, like, really that's what most they learn, at least in their graduate years. And inviting people who really can bring some ideas that people have not even listened to before, and especially people who, I know we're going to get into a question about what's a valuable speaker to have, but really bringing people who can challenge the students. I mean, the main question I think everybody should ask is that, why do I believe what I really believe? So if you just look at yourself in the mirror and say, okay, so I believe in, let's say, the theory of evolution. Why do I believe the theory of evolution? What if somebody comes in and says, you know what, this is all bullshit. The Earth is 6,000 years old, and Jesus and dinosaurs walked together in Jerusalem. I'm like, okay. But I mean, that may not be the best challenging argument. But is that, let's say, I mean, that is one thing. I mean, in other things is that when, in most of our social beliefs, socialism, capitalism, social democracy, whatever views you have about economics or social views, and I think many people take their beliefs for granted. They lean to generally what their parents believe in. Sometimes not when they are trying to be rebellious in their teenage years. But overall, many people start forming their opinions and they stick with them. And when you generally ask them, is like, why do you believe what you believe? I see many of them can hardly answer this question. And I think the only way for them to be able to answer that question is really to be exposed to different set of ideas and see their ideas challenged. And that way it can actually help their own beliefs. I mean, having somebody who challenges your ideas doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. It just means that what he says might have a grain of truth, and also it might reinforce what you actually believe in. So it is a really good practice if you want to master any subject and try to talk about it with confidence and knowledge, is really to be exposed to as many ideas as possible. But I think some ideas need to be censored. I think we need to talk about later. But I think overall, I think there is a spectrum of ideas that I think should be available to the masses. But
so Zach, you said that racism is a pathetic excuse for disinviting a speaker to campus. Are there any reasons that you believe do merit disinviting a speaker to campus?
So, yes, the first thing I would say is that I think there are a number of reasons why someone should not invite a speaker in the first place. If you do not think that someone actually believes what they're saying, that there is some kind of value that can be edifying, that can be purposeful, that can be conducive in a learning environment. And I'll give a specific example. Milo Yiannopoulos. I defend his right to speak, but I would not invite him to campus because I don't think he's interested in doing anything other than just upsetting people. So I think there are a number of reasons why you shouldn't invite a speaker in the first place, and that you should be thoughtful about that and tactful in how you approach it. When it comes to disinviting speakers, I draw the line where the First Amendment is drawn. And so if they have not said something that is a threat or that is an incitement to imminent violence, then I think that the invitation should stay.
May I respond to
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think that's where we can show we have disagreements here. So in terms of, I think there is a differentiation to be made, which I think is important between private venues and public venues. I think public venues are abided by constitutional laws that I think a private institution or even a venue is abided by. So denying, let's say, if a venue somewhere, let's say BAM in Brooklyn, decides that inviting Minneapolis is a bad idea, he's not having his First Amendment cancelled. I think many people cannot differentiate between First Amendment rights and free speech as a concept and as a whole. And I think that is very important. So his free speech rights are not being denied by not being invited into a certain venue. And I think that many of the propagandists like Milo and others will try to say, well, somebody disinvited me, therefore I have been denied my free speech. You don't have a right. I don't have a right to come to speak at Columbia. Some people decided to invite me, and it has been approved in some board, etc. So I think that, and when it comes to limits, I totally agree with you in terms of like whether this person is even honest to begin with. Like, really, does he really believe that? But I also find an issue. I think I mentioned that in my previous event, is that liberal democracy have a failure here. Is that in fascist society, Nazi societies, Islamic society, or not Islamic society, but Islamic theocracies, liberals are killed everywhere. Anyone who is allowed to espouse any liberal idea is being killed. But somehow, liberal societies allow Nazism, fascism, Islamism to grow. And I think that puts, do you guys understand the argument? Is that we are kind of at disadvantage here. Is that under Nazism, you cannot be a liberal. But under liberalism, you can be a Nazi. And I think that puts us, as a liberal societies or liberal democracies, puts us as a very major disadvantage. And so in the grand scheme of things, I think that the ideas that leads to the destruction of liberal democracy needs to be censored. And I'm very open to actually discuss what that means, because I'm still forming out my own opinion about the subject. But if, let's say, there was an amazing case by a guy called Anjum Chowdhury. For those who don't know him, please Google him. He's a British imam, actually not imam, he's a recruiter. He's a recruiter for ISIS. And he comes from a law background. And he was able to utilize all of these kind of loopholes, let's say in our free speech laws in liberal democracies, to become a major recruiter for terrorist organizations worldwide. And until he eventually said, hello guys, join ISIS, over all that period of time he was not arrested. So for years he was given this open platform, and people say like, well, we have to support the free speech of ideas, the free market of ideas. I think that, and I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, because I think the free market of ideas allow me to speak, even though I have unpopular opinions by some people. But I think is that there has to be some level and that level is not arbitrary. I think that what sometimes people call as a slippery slope, I think that slippery slope is a slippery slope. We've always maintained regulations on some free markets for environmental regulations, etc., which I think are good for the society. I think we have to be able to say, okay, we're not going to give a platform to some dude like Anjum Chowdhury or others who openly use Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, BBC, sometimes when they invite him, etc., to become recruiter by the hundreds to terrorist organizations who will lead to the destruction of liberal democracies as we know them. So, and I would extend that beyond just the ISIS membership. I think that Nazi ideals are part of ideas that will lead to the destruction of liberal democracy. So I think that, because in that way, if we are competing with these fascistic ideologies that are pumping out, funded by Russia on one hand, funded by Qatar and Saudi Arabia on the other, we have to win. We have to win somehow. And if we're going to win, we have to be aware that this is not an even game. We have to be able to play, not necessarily by the same rules. I'm not trying to advocate we become the Saudi Arabia on the other side. But we have to be aware that when we're trying to win against the war of terrorism or the war against Nazism, we should not be just ambivalent or even more relativistic in saying that all ideas have equal merits. That the same guy who says women and men should be equal should be given the same platform as saying that gays should be beheaded. I don't think that these two sentences have equal merit. I don't think that these two sentences should be allowing the free market of ideas to exist and to be given a platform. So that's what my positions are right now. As in terms of what policies should be advocated for and how, and I've consulted for many tech companies and many big platforms, and some of them may you know, and I've always advised them on the subject that why are we giving ISIS, allow them to open their video or use that video and recruit other people on the internet? That's ridiculous. Just because we support free market ideas, does it mean we should allow ideas that are violent to spread like wildfire, and all these new techniques, if you know how to use the right hashtags and use the right music at the beginning and really play with the marketing of the brain, and you're able to get your idea watched by 100,000 views, maybe 90,000 are not going to get recruited, but 10,000 will be like, oh, this ISIS thing seems like they're doing a good job. Like, we should not allow that to happen in the first place. And I think that we have to create some limits here and there to make sure that doesn't happen, to save the liberal democracies that we have left in the world.
What do you think about that? Yeah.
So my concern, and I think
Well, two people.
I think I understand where you're coming from. My concern would be that if you're going to put these restrictions in place, one is the authority, and when the authority changes, right, what then is, there's this possibility that what is banned or what is restricted then begins to include a number of other things. And so I guess my question would be, if what we are going to try to do is restrict extreme speech that leads to violence and intimidation, how would you, and I know this might be a tough thing to do on the fly, but do you have a sense of how you would define that, like more specifically? Like what exactly constitutes that kind of speech and what doesn't? Where do you draw the lines?
I mean, that's actually, that's one reason is I'm not woke enough. I'm woke, but not woke enough. Is that, in terms of First Amendment, in terms of really the NYPD going to places and arresting Alex Jones, no, I think that in terms of really utilizing force, I'm more talking about, first what I'm starting for is really starting with a private enterprise, which is, I think, have its own regulations, have its own board of directors who really, corporate board who really decide things, which I think puts it in a separate than the governments. I'm as well as someone who comes from a regime, Saddam Hussein, I think you know where I stand on this. Let's assume, this argument can also be used against free markets, is that how can we be sure that the next president is going to maintain the regulations? But I don't think, and I could be wrong, that the lines between what is extremism and what is violent extremism is pure arbitrary. As somebody who been a practitioner in the world of counter-extremism, counterterrorism, and now I have my NGO, is that I think, obviously this is not, there's this, I think, from the Supreme Court when, how do we know what defines porn? And he's like, you know it when you see it, right? And also there's the argument of like, when it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Is that there is, some things I think are purely obvious. Hello everybody, you should join the Nazi party. Let's now go kill the Jews. Well, that sounds pretty easy to figure out. So if you look at these things as spectrum, and if you put like 10 and 9 and 8, let's say 10 being the violent extremists, that would be the ISIS of the world, Al-Qaeda of the world. These are people who utilize violence to advocate for their political ideology. And then you have 9 who are somewhere in between, who might use violence once in a while. And then you have people who are ISIS-light, who might not be directly doing violence, but still be utilizing as a recruiter for. I think that this is, in terms of, if you define by specific groups, I think it's not arbitrary at all. You can define the Muslim Brotherhood as being 8, and you can define ISIS being 10, and it seems to me as a clear. So that's one. Obviously, I'm specialized in one specific form of extremism, so I cannot comment on others. But I think it's not that arbitrary in terms of where to draw really the line of what can be counted as extremist content. And I would define it as really the advocate for values that will lead to the destruction of universal human rights. And kind of the world order. I don't want to use the liberal world order because Alex Jones might want me tonight, but the kind of the world order that is leading toward peace and harmony between the world. Let's say our vague sentences. I wish I can be more clear on this, but really, like any values that lead to the destruction of liberal societies, liberal democracies would be something that I would consider extreme, but also there's extreme, and also there's a lot of discussions within these platforms, big ones and small ones, is that should we ban just the violent extreme and not the extreme? And that's, I think, is a really conversation to have, good conversation to have. I mean, even here, or we can continue in the bar. But I think this is going to be a discussion of the 21st century, in my opinion, is that we have these open platforms. Facebook now have 2 billion users. I mean, that's more than the population of, I think they're now 3, maybe more. And that's more than the population of China and India combined. I mean, there are 3 billion. That's a lot of people. And all these people have their own agendas. Some of them might want to just see cat videos and want to see some hot girls on Instagram. But some might actually really utilize this platform, as I have utilized it myself, to recruit people who are liberals from Baghdad and Syria and others, to do the same, to start to recruit. Okay, how about you plant a bomb here in Belgium? How about you try to? That's what happens when you bring 3 billion together. So you have to regulate their interaction with each other. And the community standards right now have been kind of vague, and for obvious reasons, because you have billions of people, and that's a lot to deal with. But I think it's very important to have this conversation, to really making sure that this platform, global platform, as I said, I want to start first with the platforms and then move to the government, and then we take it from there. And and maybe that would lead to the destruction of liberal democracies too, in terms of censoring people, and then maybe having an authoritarian government or authoritarian boss of major corporations. So as I said, I'm open to that discussion. But I think now, if you ask me, because 2 years ago, I used to be what's sometimes called a free speech absolutist. And I come from Iraq, so obviously I also have an emotional reaction to free speech, because Saddam Hussein and then the militias afterwards, you write something against them, you get killed. So my first reaction, I would say emotional reaction, has been generally towards free speech is great, free market of ideas, but then when I realized that the bad ideas spread like wildfire and the good ideas have only 200 views, then I'm like, maybe that's something to reconsider. And I hope you reconsider that tonight.
Do you have any pushback on that?
So I would say I share your concern for extreme speech. My reservation comes with in how you regulate it with respect to platforms. And so what I think is that it would be advisable, it would be smart, it is important for Mark Zuckerberg, for people in his position, for society in general, to be sensible, to be reasonable, to be judicious in thinking about who has access to things, who we're inviting to things. But when it comes to regulating it or restricting it, that's where I would have to see something that's clearly defined, because you mentioned the kind of 1 is an 8 on the scale of 1 to 10. So is it everything that's higher than a 7, everything that's higher than an 8? What you might think falls as an 8, someone might think falls as a 6. So that's where I think it's somewhat intersubjective, right? It's a very complex world where people are coming to the table with many different experiences. So I'm hesitant, I'm reluctant to say that we should restrict speech and we should ban people like Alex Jones. I understand the thinking behind it, and I think that we should try to think about it intelligently. I understand Mark Zuckerberg is in a tough position. People in similar positions are as well. But I think we should certainly take that concern seriously.
May I challenge you on one thing? Just one thing. Yeah, I mean, that's not always. So, like, let me give you an example from what you just mentioned about Alex Jones, right? So Alex Jones made a video saying that the Democrats are launching a civil war on July 4th on YouTube. And he utilized, I'm serious. And I'm sure there are like some other websites who uploaded that video. So let's say, so Salad Jones posted that YouTube, Facebook, etc. I mean, this is like, I mean, this speech can lead to violence. I mean, if you look at the comment section of that video, was like, hell yeah, we're gonna kill him. Okay, like, I mean, this speech is not just, let's assume, I mean, unfortunately there are people who listen to Alex shows, but from a moral standpoint, if you're Mark Zuckerberg or Google, is like, would you want to allow a guy saying that to not only use your platform, but even fundraise and make money and get richer to develop more crazy content like this on your platform? This is actually the question that, I mean, he can say this stuff whenever he wants. He can just like go on Dallas Fort Worth and shout in front of the airport, but that is
the platform is what you should have.
Yeah. But well, guys should like upload this video and say, and especially like on a specific day, July 4th, prepare the Democrats are launching a civil war. Obviously, it's a crazy statement, but there are people who might be receptive to it, and you cannot prevent the world from having idiots. We'll always have idiots, and the question is, how can we maintain that from really reaching to, because if one guy pulled the trigger, right? If 5 people go kill 10 Democrats, and then maybe some other Democrats will follow revenge, and then that's it. I mean, I'm not saying that that's how Iraq went, but I'm saying that to some extent, this is how generally many of these tribal warfares end up. It's like one guy shoots somebody, and then 2 people get angry, and then they revenge against someone else, and then it's eventually tribe versus tribe, and then 100 people are killed.
I have a question about that. So do you think we should reconsider this present imminent danger standard that we have under the First Amendment? Do you think it's not strong enough or like loose enough to involve cases that are, July 4th? Because as it is now, it's kind of like, well, July 4th, that could be any time, when, where. Do you think it should be looser?
Well, I mean, I'm not a legal scholar, so I'm not going to recommend, say my understanding of the First Amendment. I think there are people who are 1,000 times more qualified than me on the First Amendment subject and constitutional standard. But I'm thinking of it, again, my thinking comes from the really purely corporate business standpoint, is that I think, yes, from a platform point of view, they should ban him. PayPal should have banned him, Facebook should have banned him, Twitter should have banned him. As for whether the government should intervene and send police and file an FBI report, or should the FBI come to their house, I'm actually leaning towards no. But because I don't want the government and its army and massive military to be involved in such issues. But in terms from a private business standpoint, I think they should. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you have any?
I understand the position. I'm less convinced by it. I share the concern. I think that there is also value in making wrongness apparent, right? In the same way that you can bring a speaker to campus and you deeply disagree with what the speaker is saying, you know that what they're saying is troubling or very problematic or thoroughly unsettling, and that then you have an opportunity to expose the flaws in that argument, then when you can make that wrongness apparent, there's value in doing that, right? That you're then able, for those who are undecided or those who don't know as much about the subject, you're able then to take that opportunity to say, well, this is why this is wrong, this is why this is problematic. So in some sense, I would rather have the speech there out in the open. Right? So that's another reason why I wouldn't want to restrict it.
What do you think about the pervasive political biases on these social media platforms, though? Because as soon as we allow them to start banning whoever they see as problematic, it might be just all alt-right or conservatives.
Right, no, I think the issue with how the algorithms work, it reinforces confirmation bias, is a serious thing. The one thing that I'm happy about with respect to that is that it is now becoming a part of conversations about free speech and open dialogue everywhere. People are aware of the fact, and I hope we can continue raising awareness of this fact, that social media in many ways reinforces what you already think and feel. And so I think being conscious of that, kind of actively resisting it by seeking out other sources, may be one way to combat it.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how algorithms work, I mean, obviously I don't support many of these reports that are being published everywhere about people are considered alt-righters, etc. But generally, like, how the algorithm works is that YouTube and all of these platforms want to gather what you like. I mean, that's really how the systems work. They work with advertising, and as a result, like, so you end up with one video, and then they recommended you through this algorithm to video content that you might like, and you keep clicking, and then eventually you end up with like a dinosaur eating a fish. That's really my YouTube experience all the time. So I think is that understanding that really is vital. Understanding that how these platforms work, because I think that people should be taught about what confirmation bias is, and really need to understand that you should not always go for the content that you like. And maybe that sounds basic, but I think people should go from there. But as a result of really knowing these algorithms, you will see that it is not just it's like an equal free market of ideas. There are some videos that have better chance of going viral than others. I mean, I've worked in marketing, and just an example, like Ben Shapiro destroys a leftist, okay? This video is 1 million views. The reason why it's 1 million views compared to probably, I think, our conversation is really the fact that these platforms incentivize emotional triggering reactions. That's why you have people uploading videos with these titles. So it's not just an open free market of ideas. There are some ideas that are more favorable sorry, my English is from the Saudis. Favorable because they lead to more emotional triggers. In fact, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the New York Times have a different online section and offline section, right? The title of the news are different in some articles between the online and offline section, because this is how not the internet works. It's mostly trying to incentivize more extreme triggering material. So as a result, the good ideas, I mean, the internet is set up in a way, especially many of these platforms, and the algorithms are set up in a way that will incentivize more crazy. That's why Milo gets famous. I mean, that's one reason why Milo, I mean, you mentioned as is a person who deserves a platform. Milo gets famous because of these algorithms. Milo destroys the lefty at UC Berkeley, and then it's like, there's somebody commenting about the commenting, and somebody commenting about the commenting about the commenting, and then there's like 20,000 videos on Milo Yiannopoulos, his SEO goes up, blah, blah, Milo gets famous. And so it is really not an equal platform of ideas. I mean, these platforms have became, and as a result, I think we have to, I mean, obviously platforms have to, that's a bigger discussion, but think about whether it's more important to favor money or to favor civil dialogue, and how to stop these platforms from use for political polarization. But that's the reason why it incentivizes me more to say that these platforms should ban these individuals. Because I mean, if Alex Jones had 200 views, and the fact that we're even talking about him today, he's like some crazy guy in Austin, the fact that he's like a known entity by millions of people shows how bad and toxic these platforms have made this guy to be, because he understood, like, if I'm gonna say crazy stuff that Obama was controlled by a snake somewhere on another planet, and then somebody is gonna like, oh, that's interesting, and then figuring out, oh, like, Obama is destroying America, like all of these things. And not anyway, I'm not even a fan of Obama, so I'm not actually trying to endorse the craziness, but the fact that he figured out, many of these people figured out what can trigger people, and as a result, and they keep their content flowing, and them making income, them building a platform, them becoming actually someone to invite as someone with that perspective, right? So when somebody if a crazy person has 2 million followers, he become a person that many university campuses will be like, oh, he has a point of view. But if you really realize what he actually came from, it's just some crazy nonsense. But he utilized all of these algorithms and all of these wars, destroys something like all of that, and then eventually this guy have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, if not millions, and built up a platform. And Milo is the greatest example of that. The only reason we even know Milo is because of his crazy stuff. is because he goes on a Twitter war with some actor saying the N-word, create a controversy about the N-word, going back again. That's how we all get famous. What, he has like a policy of how to defeat climate change? Like, what does Milo Yiannopoulos know about anything? Exactly, right? Like, what his policies that are really, or ideas that you really think of is like, oh, you really have a perspective here. He's just noisy, flamboyant gay guy, and he says this stuff and trigger this sport. His post goes up, somebody shares it. Oh, because also, sorry, am I talking too much? Or you have time? Is that what I found really interesting, because I mean, I work in this field, so everything is in my head. But what I also realized is that when you do a controversial thing, when you actually write a hit piece against someone, even if that hit piece is crazy, you will see that it's not only the people who hate the individual read that hit piece. It's the people who also like the individual who also read that hit piece. So as a result, many people figured out that there is actually a market value, there is a business opportunity if you write a hit piece against somebody famous. So if you take somebody famous, whoever, and then let's say Steven Pinker as example, or maybe someone more famous than Steven Pinker, and then you write a hit piece against him, it's not just the fans of Steven Pinker sharing the article. The people who hate Steven Pinker say, oh, look at this crazy guy. It will be the people who like Steven Pinker trying to argue about this article. And as a result, this article will get so much share. And as a result, this article goes viral. And even if that article is like completely nonsense, even if it's like Steven Pinker was found in Mars and he's sleeping with a goat, but even if that's content of the article, right? But you will see that it becomes high SEO, super shared, goes viral. There's commentary about it everywhere, and as a result, some of these platforms favor that content. So that's why I think I'm not talking anyway about government level First Amendment here, but I think that as a result, okay, we have figured out people who are using these tricks, able to manipulate the human consciousness, know that if we say these words, destroys, triggers, a left-wing snowflake triggered by Ben Shapiro. They know these words have really tried to generate so much views. And the left uses the same thing. It's not like anyone is innocent here. But they figured out how to use these words. And then, as a result, I think that is having an effect on us as a society. Like the people who go through the YouTube section or the Facebook section and the likes and likes after likes are following one side of the issue, and then we have people following this side of the issue, and then there's hardly really anything in common. And it was like one side, I mean, the Kavanaugh case is, I think, extreme case, but I think it really resembles that really well. You see that people at the other side don't think that people have a different opinion about the situation. They think that you are either pro-rape or pro-women. This is how divided many of these algorithms have led us to. And we've seen actually a real-time experience in the last week. That you cannot actually say, I think in my opinion now I've reached the point, we cannot say anymore that this is just an open market of ideas. The articles that are rational, and I've seen many articles, Melissa shared some, I think you have as well. You see many articles oh, this is so reasonable, this is actually a very good point. Never get anywhere, maybe 500 shares. But the ones that are provocative, gets people crazy, it's on the top. And these people have figured it out. I think we have to not maybe defeat them, but at least not make their ideas as accessible as possible.
Any thoughts about that?
I agree with a considerable portion of that analysis. I think...
is that 80% or 99%?
Close to 80%.
Okay, cool.
I think you're right. I think clickbait is a real thing. It's a real concept. I think that it is on the minds of many in the media. I think that there are journalists out there doing important work, doing great work, and that their work should receive more attention. I think that we have to think critically about the effects of social media on civil discourse. But I don't think the answer is to ban speech. I mean, if you do have extreme cases, and I certainly understand where you're coming from with respect to it, but I think that we have to think about ways of using free speech and using open dialogue to address these issues, right? The idea that you use better speech, right, in responding to speech that you don't like. That's how I think we should approach it. And so I think that progress with respect to the effects of social media will probably be incremental
values around the world? What you guys think about that, and how, if you say yes?
Well, I think at the beginning, the US should figure it out here first. The fact that we're having a conversation is a sign, but that doesn't mean, that if you have a country that is not doing it perfectly, doesn't mean you don't have the right to tell other people who are doing it very badly. And there are countries that are obviously doing extremely bad work in terms of free speech, mainly Iran on one hand, on Iran, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, many of the countries in the Middle East. There are multiple reports that publicly do that. And I think Freedom House is one of the ones that I follow, and others, in which they categorize countries that are free speech. I think that there are regions that I think, not out of just personal reasons, but one of the famous quotes is that the Middle East is opposite of Las Vegas. What happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. So I think as a result, the United States should be engaged in the Middle East in one aspect or the other. I have seen, I grew up in one of the countries the United States invaded, which is Iraq, and I've seen that some of the decisions that were made are completely disaster, and it shows that many of the people who, there's a huge separation between one hand is the DOD, which plans how to really defeat an army or kill terrorists, but the other side, which I think is really important, is how to really defeat terrorism. You can defeat some terrorists, but you have to defeat terrorism. And to defeat terrorism, you have to be engaging more in soft power. You have to engage more in the war of ideas and trying to make as many people from that region to be less extremist than they already are. So I do think that, me advocating for some changes in some platforms doesn't make me not an ally, a big ally of free speech. I think that free speech and the First Amendment in the United States, one of the main reasons why we have to be based in the United States as an organization is because many of the translations are not allowed in the Middle East due to blasphemy laws. So we're actually utilizing the First Amendment, because I give a call to an Egyptian publishing house in Egypt or Morocco, and they will say, well, I cannot publish this book because if I do it, I'm either going to be blown up or there are going to be blasphemy laws and fines against me. So I think that the international community, not just the United States, I think that let's say the coalition of the willing, for the lack of a better word, that those countries who really value I think the values that really brought civilization. Let's be honest, that the values of which many of them have written in the Enlightenment are the values why we have many of these peaceful societies. We've seen the bad results of bad ideologies and bad ideas. It's not an equal playing field in which all ideas are equal. Some ideas are better than others, and free speech, human rights are far more superior than censorship and destruction. So I think the United States should be involved in that, and so is the international community.
I believe in our values. I think we should try to spread our values. I think we should also be respectful of the fact that there are cultures, there are other countries who have a different set of values. So to the degree that should involve us intervening or imposing something, I don't think that's our place in the world. But I do think that the ideal of spreading democracy, the idea of, on a global stage, using the public platforms that we have to express clearly and effectively why it is that democracy works well, is important.
Thank you. So to go full circle, we're nearing the end before Q&A starts. What can college students do to shatter the echo chamber?
I think college students can do a number of things. I think that having events like this is great. I think that just
if you invite us.
I think just individually, if you try to have conversations about sensitive topics that you know will challenge you, topics that you care about, because I think that if you have a personal stake in something, then you're more likely to be invested. You're more likely to listen attentively, right? And making that effort to listen attentively and kind of resisting the urge to simply just persuade someone or argue, not that there is not a time and place to argue forcefully for what you believe in, but that sometimes in arguing and trying to prove someone wrong, we lose sight of the goal of trying to gain a deeper understanding of where they're coming from. So I think that on an individual front, one thing that college students can do is try to foster those kinds of conversations, whether it's in class, whether it's in the dining hall, just on campus in general. I think having public forums is good. I think Harvard has something called the Open Campus Initiative here. This organization is doing great work. So I think organizations and student groups like that are also very important. So I think there are a number of things that students can do. And another thing I would say is that I remember when I was at Williams, there were a number of students who did not feel comfortable saying what they thought in class because their beliefs did not align with the majority of students on campus. I think that you should certainly take those concerns directly to your professors outside of class and directly to your administration. And that is not to say that they're all going to respond positively, but I do think those concerns should be voiced.
Well, I agree with everything you said. To add, one of my friends just told me this last week. He said, never assume evil. So don't try to, when you are, that's actually an invitation on, advice on an individual level, is that most people, even if they have a different political view, most likely they're coming to it from an ethical standpoint. The fact, I think one of the main issues that we're having as a result of political polarization is that we're thinking that the other side is evil. In fact, even us using the word "the other side." I live in New York, and I might have the neighbors who are Republican, Democrat, etc. And the fact that even I think of them as reaching out to the other side is a problem, in my opinion. The fact that we're even utilizing these words, but I think start with the first basics that I think you have to have is don't assume evil. I mean, unless somebody's a sociopath, then you can assume evil all you want. But most people, even so, who have a different opinion of you, are most likely coming to it from an ethical standpoint. That doesn't mean they are right. They might be misguided. They might be wrong. Because I think if you are able to make that differentiation, it's really going to change your perspective of how you look at other people. I mean, I have friends. I mean, come to my birthday if you guys want to come. I have friends from all over the world and also all over the country and all over the city. And you'll see that many of them have very different political views. And the fact that I was able to maintain these friendships with all these people is really assuming first that they are not evil. Assuming that they are ethical human beings with a kind of a different, they're reaching to it from a different methodology, a different political belief and background. And obviously some of these beliefs I fundamentally disagree with. I mean, I consider myself more of a liberal and conservative when I'm rich and liberal when I'm poor. So I switch my political beliefs based on what's available in my savings account. But other than that, I'm able to maintain conversations with people of different political ideologies because number one is I don't assume they're evil. I try to engage with them on the level of ideas, try not to take anything personally. The fact that they might disagree with you with something, even though you think it's fundamentally hurting to you or women or men or your ethnic group or not, think about it that they're not evil. Try to engage with them from that level, and you might learn something on the way, and they might learn something from you. And think of it as a mutual learning experience. I know this sounds like a lot of cliches that I'm using, but I think that overall, if you just follow that as strategies that don't assume that the other side is evil, just start from there. I think it will change your whole perspective of how you look at all our political and religious differences.